Hi everyone, welcome back to ONYX Pages. This is a quick video where I'm going to be talking about the book I am about to finish, which is The Summer We Got Free by Mia McKenzie. Hi everyone, welcome back to ONYX Pages. I'm Jerry if you're new here, and I want to talk about the book that I'm just about to finish reading. So I think I've done a video like this before where I film a video right before I finish the last chapter of the book that I'm currently reading. And I really like that because you're sort of catching me in the midst of anticipation about the end of the story prior to doing my actual review. So it's kind of like last chapter, first thoughts. So I hope that you enjoy this really casual conversation about The Summer We Got Free by Mia McKenzie. So here is the cover. Fun fact about this book, it's actually one of my favorites queer speculative novels I've ever read in my entire life on this planet. I don't even remember how I first heard about Mia McKenzie or how I first heard about this story, but the book was written in 2012, and I remember that when I read it, I was kind of newer to getting back into reading speculative fiction. It was probably towards the end of law school when I was just trying to get back into reading for pleasure. And I saw this again. I don't know who told me about this book, how I found out about it, but I remember being very intrigued by the cover. So I was intrigued by this, this illustration of a young girl in a yellow dress with this paintbrush that she's holding kind of like a knife with red paint dripping from it. Is it paint? Is it blood? I don't even know. It's obviously happening in a neighborhood. And the title, The Summer We Got Free, just raised a lot of questions for me. It was just sort of mysterious. Why did you have to get free? How did it happen in the summer? Who's we? What was the freedom from? What does this have to do with paint? Why is there so much yellow? Just all of these questions about the cover. And so I read this, I believe I read it for the very first time in 2019. And then this summer, with everything going on in the world, and also at a time when I'm sort of getting back into reading from a bunch of stuff that has happened in my own life, I thought, you know what, I really want to reread a story that I remember really impacting me. So what I remembered about the story, because if you've watched this channel for a while, you know that sometimes I forget about the characters and forget about the major plot points after I've finished reading a story. So what lingered with this story was just this sense of color. I remember the story having a lot to do with art and color. I remember it being very queer. I remember there being one character and then one dynamic between two characters that took my breath away when I read it, and having the most beautiful, flirtatious, sensual scene in a book that I'd read at the time. I remember there being themes of neighborhood cohesion, religion, homophobia, being closeted, and family secrets. So I remember all of that, but I couldn't remember much about what actually happened in the story. And so in a way, it was kind of like reading the story again. Of course, once I got past the first couple of chapters, I started to remember things. Not everything. So it did sort of feel like a new reading. But the other really interesting thing about rereading this story, and also rereading stories in general, is that as a reader, I'm different, right? I'm not the same Jerry I was in 2019, perhaps for better, for worse, who knows? But it's 2025 now. I'm older, I am more mature, my life is different, my circumstances are different, the reason I read is different, and of course, as a result of all of that, the reader that I bring to these pages is different. So here's where I'm going to step aside, and sorry, Tati, I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance and the beauty and the pleasure and the practical use of annotations. So when I read this the first time, thankfully I annotated in the book, and I'll give you an example of this. So I annotated in the book, which meant that when I reread it, not only have I been interacting with the words on the page, but I've also been interacting with the annotations on the page. And now some people might find that really distracting, but I didn't. I find it very cool and very interesting to interact with my own highlights and notes and messages to, I guess, my future self that I wrote back in 2019. So if you look at this page, I hope you can see it, you'll see yellow highlights. So the yellow highlights are the words that I highlighted back in 2019. The orange highlights and underlines are my 2025 read. The black handwriting is the 2019 notes, and then the orange handwriting is the 2025 notes. And so it's kind of cool because as I was reading this, I found myself in some cases highlighting the same tracts for different reasons. I also found myself responding to things I'd written back in 2019. I didn't quite leave questions for myself, but I did have wonderings that I left on the page, or I did make notes of things that Mia McKenzie had introduced into the plot that were similar to things that were going on in my life at the time. And reading those notes gave me back some of those memories and allowed me to reflect on what I learned from those things back in the day. So I found that really interesting. I also found it interesting to note pages where I highlighted a bunch of stuff back in the day, but only really now find only some of that interesting. So for example, on this page, the green highlights are things that I had highlighted back in 2019, and then the orange again are the words that I found interesting now or compelling now or noteworthy now, and you can see there's a big difference. So it's kind of like reading your old diaries if you do that, because you end up getting a sense of yourself again. And I think reading is so much about interacting with yourself as the reader, interacting with your own stories and learning. And so I found this really, really cool. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the book. I'm going to read the blurb in the back. At one time, a wild young girl and a brilliant artist, Ava Delaney, changes dramatically after a violent event that rocks her entire family. Once loved and respected in their community, the Delaneys are ostracized by their neighbors, and a 17-year-old feud ensues. Ava and her family are displaced from the community even as they continue to live within it, trapped inside their creaky, shadowy old house. When a mysterious woman arrives unexpectedly for a visit, her presence stirs up the past, and ghosts and other restless things begin to emerge. Something is reignited in Ava. The indifferent woman she has become begins to give way to the wild girl and the passionate artist she used to be, but not without a struggle that threatens her life. So that's what the back of the book tells us the story is about. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story, and just I'll start to talk to you about some of the things that have come up for me. This isn't my 7 calorie shell because I haven't finished it, but I am maybe 10 pages away from finishing the book. So the actual in-depth discussion will come soon enough. So from my perspective, reading it right now, I feel like this story is about it's about the ways that we can become separated from who we essentially are, and the pressures around us that can bring that into being, right? So in this book, the pressures felt by the characters include the church, include the desire to be liked and respected within a community, include belonging within one's family and the desire not to be ostracized from your own family, and how those pressures can cause us to hide parts of ourselves and to allow the people around us, the people whose opinions we value, allow them to see us in a way that we think they will enjoy, as opposed to how and who we really are. So, staying true to ourselves, but also I find that Mia McKenzie isn't like overly judgmental of her characters. I think that she treats all of them with tenderness. And I think this story helps us understand the complexity of how we are shaped. So, and what happens when we decide to free ourselves from the bondage, right, that can be created by our need to belong, right? Our need to be safe, and not need to belong in like a superficial way. So it's not necessarily about the desire to be cool or to be liked, but like that deep sense of being loved, being cared for, being cherished, being protected, being valued, and the things we do for love, right? The things we do for that feeling, that connection, and what happens when we don't have it, right? And the lengths we'll go to get it. What happens when we shut down? So just so many beautiful lessons and meditations in this book about that. I also really enjoyed the villain in this story. There is one clear villain, and I don't remember there being a villain the last time I read it, right? I don't remember seeing this character as a villain. And this time around, I see this character as a bad character. Definitely nuanced, definitely motivated by things that make sense, but still bad. And so I remember being moved by them, but I really like the ways in which I understand this character now. So that's something that's cool, and how this character has the ability to influence all sorts of people around them. I also really appreciate the art in the story. There are a number of types of art that various characters practice. So we see culinary arts, we see visual arts through painting, we see sculpting. I think that's what we have so far. So there are a number of different characters who engage in art, and as a result of their engaging in art, we get to interact with various works of art and discussions about works of art in the story. And I remember the first time I read it, I remember encountering color, but not necessarily the amount of art that I now appreciate. And then, of course, there's color, right? This story is it's so enriched with color, literal color. So you will see a lot of recurring uses of certain colors, yellow and red for the most part, but other colors as well. And the colors take on this magical, mystical element in really powerful and beautiful ways. Mia McKenzie is masterful in her craft. I want to say this was her debut novel. It was the winner of the 2013 Lambda Literary Award for very good reason. There's a lot of texture to her storytelling. There are many stories being told simultaneously from various perspectives over two intersecting timelines. So The present day is 1976, and then there's also a story from 1950. So as you heard in the blurb, there's a 17-year gap between tragedy happening in the family in the 1950s and then the family having to reckon with that tragedy in the 1970s. So of course, this is all, it's happening 50s, 60s, 70s in the US in, I think, where is it? Are they in Philadelphia? I think they're in Philadelphia. But of course, there were things happening for Black communities in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the United States. And so that's also the backdrop. There's a political backdrop as well. It's not front and center in the story, but it's certainly happening in the background, which again, the pressure, when you have white supremacy and racism and homophobia and sexism and patriarchy, sticking its claws into your community, that need to belong is even greater, right? Because there's risk. If you don't belong here, you definitely not going to belong out there. So, perhaps we risk more, perhaps we tuck more of ourselves away because we know what's on the other end of belonging. And I think the thing that, and my favorite character is the main character. I don't know if I can say that. I struggle with favorites, but there's something about, there are two characters who are very in touch with themselves. And I love reading the story from their perspective and reading about them and their thoughts and their feelings, because the way they interact with those thoughts and feelings is so different from the other characters, right? They're not as restrained and constrained, and they're not as unaware of their lack of freedom as the other characters are. So yeah, this story is very compact, right? You get a really good sense of this block, this neighborhood, and the families in it, the traumas that they experience, the ways in which they work together and support each other, and the ways in which they don't. It's just really, really wonderful. And I think in my last video, when I said I was going to read this, I got some comments. I think one was from Danica about this book being so atmospheric, and it really is. We see, we're told a lot about the storms and the weather and the rain and the sunlight, the different seasons that the family and the community go through. There's a lot of clarity around what's happening in the day, what's happening at night, and I just love that. You really do get a sense of what this community is about and what the characters are going through. The supernatural elements are really fantastic, no pun intended, really fantastic as well. And I'd forgotten about some of the supernatural elements in the story. There are many surrealist elements to the story, with many questions that don't actually get answered, and I'm okay with that. But it was just such a wonderful, wonderful read. So I'm going to leave it there. If you have read The Summer We Got Free by Mia McKenzie, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do stay tuned. At some point soon, I will have a full review of the story. I'm going to be finishing this last chapter, so there'll be a bit of a, it's over, but let me talk about it. And then I'll get into the 7 calorie shell rate. I'm not calling it a rating system anymore. I'm calling it a analysis. So,
ooh, analysis. I love it.
Hi, Tommy.
Hi, Jerry. Your brilliance is always.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'm not calling it a rate system anymore. I'm calling it an analysis, because I feel like focusing it as on a rating system, it forces us to assess as opposed to interact, right? Like it.
I like that distinction.
Because if we're having a bad day or our belly's hurting us and we read a book, we might just not like it because of reasons that have nothing to do with the story.
Yeah.
And people have different reasons for reading. And I feel like when we give something 4 stars or 5 stars or 1 star or 2 stars, which often happens with Black books, we deprive ourselves of having like a more nuanced reaction to what we're reading. So yeah.
I Look forward to your analysis.
Thank you. So yes, that is it. That is it. If you have watched this video all the way to the end, thank you very much for watching. Please put a red emoji and a yellow emoji in the comments to match the cover, and I will see you in my next video. So remember always to read with purpose, and when you do, tell me about it. I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.